And we are live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for this Road to Inbound series. I'm going to be joined by Lori Richardson in just a moment. Now, we're going to give you a little bit of a teaser today because Lori and I are going to be leading a meetup at Inbound on the very last day of Inbound, specifically for sales leaders. So make sure that if you're going to Inbound that you put on your calendar to search for the meetup of proven strategies for sales leaders in 2025. Because here's the thing, a lot of times we talk about revenue strategies and we're always talking about what do the salespeople need to do? What do the sales managers need to do? But what about the sales leaders? Because it's the sales leaders who really set the culture, the tone, and what's going to happen in 2025. So Lori and I are going to be focused on what are the strategies that sales leaders need to execute on to have a proven ROI and predictable revenue in the coming year. Now, if you all know Lori Richardson, you know how amazing she is. She is a sales problem solver working with leaders of mid-sized B2B companies at the company she founded, which is Score More Sales. She starts with data, which is the thing that we have in common, and infuses learning to help sales teams and their leaders to go to market quicker, reduce turnover, and scale profitably. Lori is also the author of She Sells and hosts the award-winning podcast, Conversations with Women in Sales. So please welcome to the stage with me, Lori Richardson. Hi, Lori.
Hey, hi, everybody. So great to be here.
I'm so glad that we get to have this conversation because I feel like we have these conversations behind the scenes all the time. And so I'm so glad that we're finally bringing it to the forefront. Yeah. And for all of you, I guess I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Carole Mahoney. I'm the founder of Unbound Growth and the author of the book, Buyer First, Grow Your Business with Collaborative Selling.
And very good book. I might recommend.
It's a very good book. Thank you. And so is yours, which we're going to dive into a little bit today, because a lot of the things that you share in your book speak directly to sales leaders and what they need to be able to do. So why don't we just dig into this? And for all of you who are here now, make sure that you're typing into the comments your questions, the lessons that you've learned the hard way, or even some of the challenges that you're hoping that we can help you to address. So post those questions now. But I've got a couple of questions for Lori right off of the bat. First of all, Lori, what do you think is the biggest mistake that sales leaders make when they're doing their revenue strategies and planning for a strong end of year or a coming up into the 2025 year? What's the number one thing?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to say that I think people are not realistic a lot of times, and they may just be picking a number out of the air. They're not basing it on reality because they have shareholders that are looking for something and they want them to say something that they may or may not believe is possible. I don't know. What do you think?
I find the same exact thing, that they're setting their quotas not based off of what's realistic and achievable for the organization. And I've even seen and heard the horror stories where sales leaders will purposely set quotas that are unattainable because I don't know why. Maybe because they wanted to completely diminish the morale of their team or set unrealistic expectations and then not give them the resources. I have to believe that that's not the case, but that's what I see happening as well. And the thing I see happening most of the time, and it all starts with how they hire their salespeople, which you and I both know is unlike any other role in a company that they're going to hire for. So in terms of a revenue strategy for 2025, when thinking about hiring salespeople, what is the number one thing that you would have them keep in mind as they start thinking about that?
Well, I want them to keep in mind how many people do you actually need, and not with a cushion or a buffer, because the way people used to hire salespeople is that they'd hire extra because they knew a bunch of them wouldn't work out. And that's true because they were not, it's just so hard to hire with your gut. And that's how most of us hire, or we use personality tools, which don't help us know who's a good hire. So you don't have to hire a cushion, a buffered amount of people. You should be able to forecast the exact number that you think you're going to need, assuming that you forecast your numbers correctly, right? At the previous point.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see sales leaders make when hiring salespeople, like you just said, like they know that there's a certain percentage of their salespeople that aren't going to work out. Like it's like, what, a 50-50 shot these days? Like I sometimes wonder if we'd be better off just going to Vegas and putting our money down on the blackjack.
Yeah, I think that would be good if someone could do 50%, but most can't.
Yeah. And I think that it comes because they don't fully realize what the cost of a bad sales hire is. And FYI, y'all, Lori and I have some resources to share with you. And one of the resources I have is actually a calculator to calculate what is the cost of a failed sales hire for you. Now, most of you will probably say, oh, isn't the average like around 30,000, between their initial salary and what it costs to onboard them? And it's grossly underestimated because you're not taking into account the lost opportunity cost. You're not taking into account the morale that happens with the team when they see their coworkers like leave, either because they're unsuccessful or because the culture is so toxic.
Yeah.
And it can be upwards of millions of dollars for a single sales hire, depending on what your sales cycle is and what the average order value is.
Yeah. In fact, we had a client that told us that it would be $1 million mistake if they hired the wrong person.
I think the highest number I've ever seen calculated, and this was an enterprise sale for industrial types of equipment, was almost $6 million.
Yeah.
And they had a hard time swallowing that pill because it's a little bit of a gut wrench. And so if we know that hiring needs to be done in a way that is more predictable, what do you see successful sales leaders doing in the initial hiring process to make that more predictable?
Well, they're reaching out to someone like us who can help them to do it predictably. So I would say that that's really a good first step. And it doesn't have to be us, but you need a way that's going to be more predictable than hiring with your gut to be successful with sales and also in hiring sales managers.
Yeah. I had a recent conversation with a sales manager who was interviewing people. And he said to me, I can tell within 15 minutes if someone's going to be a good salesperson or not. And I was like, oh, have you heard of this thing called unconscious bias? And it was a little bit scary for me because,
say what that is, Carole, for people that aren't clear about it.
So unconscious bias is when we have a bias towards people, either on how they look or how they sound, and that our bias is more inclined to be, are they like me? And so we're looking for people that we like. We're looking for people that are like us. And this bias creeps in when we do these long initial interviews, or we're looking at resumes and we're only looking at it in a certain way. And so this bias, it's unconscious. We don't even realize that we're doing it, but we all have it. And in the hiring process, it's absolutely detrimental for you to be able to get that predictable ROI and keep your top salespeople in your organization.
Yeah, like the company I worked at in Boston, they were all looking for mostly guys who came from prep school and college, played lacrosse.
Yeah.
College. Like that was a winner. It doesn't matter who they were going to be great on our sales team. And in fact, athletes can be really good because there are a lot of parallels. I just was talking about that over the weekend to Dan Goodman, who's a great guy to follow. And but it can also be a very selfish thing if you're a top athlete and you're in a situation where you are all about you're not going to fit into a sales culture very well. So it's not true. It could be true, but it's not guaranteed at all.
Yeah. No, and I know diversity is something that we want to talk about in a moment, but one of the things that I did research on was finding what is it that buyers truly value today. And Deb Calvert's book, Stop Selling, Start Leading, she cites a study from Santa Clara University where they surveyed B2B buyers to ask them that question, like we all want to know, what do you value most in a salesperson? And the overwhelming answer across industries and generational ages is that buyers today value salespeople who can help them to come up with new ideas, new insights, and different perspectives on their problems and situations. You can't have innovation when you have all the same people thinking the same things.
Right. Yeah, you need a diverse group. And in fact, our buyers are diverse and our buyers want sellers who are diverse. If nothing else, for diversity of thought and for having different ways of doing things. In fact, I remember very early in my career, I was hired to take over a territory for this guy named Lenny. I'll just call him Lenny. I won't use his last name in case he's still on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And he was so horrible that one of my prospects wouldn't even give him the chance to bid on a huge opportunity because they didn't like him. He was very self-centered and full of himself, according to them. And so when I came on board, I said, well, he's not here anymore. He's not here in this role. So could I get an opportunity? And so I actually did get an opportunity, and we won a multi-million-dollar deal in my first 90 days because I took a different approach, and I wasn't egotistical, and I wasn't full of, oh, we can do this and that. In fact, I was buyer first way back then. So
before it was cool.
Yeah, before it was cool. And, and that's just one example. And I don't think it was because I was a woman. It's because I just had a different way of approaching them. And it was all about them and what they needed. And we got in the last minute, and we ended in, it was a huge win for our company.
Yeah. Now in your book, She Sells, I hear a lot of talk about how women are better salespeople, and yet they're paid less than their male counterparts. Can you talk a little bit about that, the role of women in sales today, and how you think this is going to play into more predictable revenue?
Yeah, I've actually not seen, Carole, you and I are really big believers on true data. And there are a lot of surveys and studies where they're just a couple hundred people or 50 people. For me, we need a bigger pool of people. I've not seen a study that proves that women are better in sales. Now, people will argue that, and I say, what if we're just as good? So let's just assume if we're just as good, there are more women that graduate at the university level than men. There are, 50% of the world is made up of females.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, if we're just as good as men in sales, why aren't half of our sales teams female? Why aren't half of our sales leaders women? So I say, and then when you get up to the heads of sales, like we're talking about leadership today, there just aren't the women out there in those roles because they're not being promoted. They're not being developed. Women are not raising their hand. It's like a multi-pronged issue. And we really need to do that, because if we had more women in leadership positions, we'd have more women on sales teams. So it's kind of a vicious circle, if you will.
I know. And you and I have this conversation. It's kind of like I feel it's like a chicken and egg conversation where I'm on a mission to change the perception of sales, and you're on a mission to get more women involved in sales and in sales leadership. And the two go together. It's like an Oreo cookie almost, where I believe we'll change the perception of sales and we'll get more women in sales. But I also think we need more women in sales in order to change the perception of sales. Yeah. And so chicken and egg. But bottom line is we need to have more diversity, more women in sales, because how many sales leaders out there saying, I'm having a hard time qualifying candidates, getting good people to apply for these jobs? You're missing out on half of the population, guys.
Yeah. And it's still true. We see pictures. I just had a debate on LinkedIn with a guy who posted 45 books about sales, and 4 of them were written by women. And then he reposted, and he took all my work that I did and turned it into a new graphic. So, it's cool. But yeah, we need to change to normalize the fact that women are in sales, and it's not a big deal. And we're not just focused on ourselves. If you write a book about sales, it's not just for women, it's for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, all right, so these are the mistakes that we're making in sales. And I typically find that these mistakes for sales leaders it starts with the very job description and the role criteria for success in the role, right? Like you said, they need to be an athlete from this particular university, as somehow that this is going to be predictable of sales success, which I always love to ask the question. I'm like, have you ever had an athlete not succeed in sales? They're like, oh yeah. I'm like, so then how is it predictable of success?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about what are the first things that a sales leader needs to do to get the hiring process right?
Well, they need to know what the role is really about. And I think that a lot of us have these old lists of what the duties are, and we've never really sat in the role or talked to people directly involved. And I would suggest that somebody do that, whether it's a matter of just updating the list as a team, or actually living it, getting out there in the field to see what's going on, because things are inaccurate. And they're hiring people who aren't even going to do the job that they're told. And how many times did that ever happen to you? I know it happened to me a lot in sales, where what I was doing 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, had nothing to do with most of what was in my job description.
Yeah. I'm taking a class at Wharton now, the neuroscience of business, and we're talking about like psychological safety and what is a good manager and what is not a good manager, and why do people leave. And there was a study that was done that over 50% of people, actually, I think it was over 70% of people in a role left because they said that the role wasn't a fit for them and didn't line up with the job description. Like
over 50%? Is that what you said?
50%. I was
Wow.
close. I'm going to go back and double check, but I want to say it was like 73% said that they didn't feel that they were a fit for the role and that they felt that the job description was misleading.
And that's an easy one to fix. That's an easy one.
It's the easiest one to fix. But what happens, and I've seen this happen because you work with HR teams just as I do, and I feel so bad for these HR leaders and teams because they're getting all of the pressure to get the sales hire right, but they don't have the input from the sales hiring manager. They don't, they haven't talked to customers to know what it is. And so a lot of times they're forced to just copy and paste a job description from somewhere else. And then that becomes the advertisement that they use. By the way, people, this is a quick, easy one for you. Job descriptions are not ad postings. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
And that's what I see happen is that the people who are actually intimately knowledgeable about the role are not the ones that are writing that job description and creating that role profile. It's like we're locked away. And I think we had this conversation earlier that we're locked away in our ivory towers to figure out what it is. And we need to be down in the field in figuring all of this out.
Yeah. The HR folks are part of the team that are going to help you successfully execute on this. So you need to involve those folks early on, and vice versa. They need to be able to lean into hiring managers and anybody involved in that role to give good feedback.
Yeah. I mean, and I've talked with HR hiring managers who have told me about how many resumes that they need to pile through, how many interviews, and how it's like 20 hours per hire in what they need to do. And if they have more than 10 people to fill, and that's just in the sales department, never mind the rest of the organization. So they're taking on all of the responsibility for something that they don't have very much control over. And so they're kind of being set up for failure as well. And that's just not fair to anyone.
No.
So job descriptions are not job postings. What does make a good job posting in your opinion?
Well, what I don't want to see is 100 bullet points, because from the standpoint of hiring more women, women do not respond well to many, because they're going to exclude themselves at some point. When you have 20 or 30 things that this job must have, is required, at some point, a lot of women are going to be realistic. And this isn't about lack of confidence, which some people think, but they're going to realistically say, you know what, Carole, I just don't do all those things. So better that I don't waste your time. I'm just not going to opt in.
Right.
And men, have a different mindset about it, but you're going to lose some candidates that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is I see I shouldn't say job descriptions, job postings, because they're posting the job description. The first 2/3 of it is all about the company. We are XYZ and we sell this and we're innovating the marketplace. And if you were to blank out the company name and just read it, it would sound like any other job in any other place. And here you are saying you want to attract the most qualified candidates, the best candidates for this position, but you can't differentiate yourself in your job postings because you all look and sound the same. So how is anyone to decide what's a right fit for them if you do that?
That's a great point.
I like to keep them short. I like to make it's an advertisement. So lean on your marketing team for some help in this area, because they know, or they should know, how to write a good ad that's going to not just capture their attention, but have that person who's reading it be able to identify themselves in it. Because if I read a job posting ad, to your point, like women see all of these bullet points, and if I don't, if I see 1 or 2 or 3 of those in there that I have no experience with, I'm like, maybe this isn't the right fit for me. But if I can see a short job description that talks about what my strengths are in doing this and the type of, things that I'm going to encounter in it, as well as a pay scale, because don't waste my time if this isn't going to be within the pay scale that I need, then I'm gonna be more inclined to apply for that particular type of role because I can see myself in that company.
Yeah, and while you mentioned pay, make sure that both genders are being paid the same.
Yeah. I was talking with
genders. I'll say all genders. How's that?
Yeah, exactly. All genders. I was talking with someone from the UK the other day, and they were talking about how there's pay transparency. Like the US is a good decade behind the rest of the world in having pay transparency. And it's like this, I don't know, this thing where you can't talk about how much you make with someone. Maybe it's I don't know, fear of money or comfortable discussing money, or they're just going to be reprimanded by their company. Some companies do that. And I think it fuels this whole thing. And I see more and more women being willing to negotiate their pay and their salaries because they all know that I'm likely getting paid less for something that I'm doing. I see this happen to myself. I was doing a workshop. I'm doing a workshop in a couple of months, and they had posted this person normally charges this, and I charge this, and they were charging $10,000 more than I was for the same type of work. I'm like, I need to raise my rates.
Yeah.
It's a thing, and it's still a thing where women are still getting paid less for the same amount of work or more work in some cases.
Yeah. And also I've seen it where there are women who maybe they've come back into the workforce and they have kids that they're, dealing with, and they just want a flexible schedule. So they'll give up a pay increase for having a flexible schedule when in fact they probably could have both.
Yeah.
So start high. We both know Barbara Weaver Smith that says, ask for scary plus 20%. And I think that's a really good
percent now with inflation.
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb, for whatever it is that we're negotiating.
Yeah, and I remember my first startup job, which was technically also one of my first sales jobs. Year one kicked it out of the park. Year two, when we went down and we sat and I did my review with them, and they were willing to offer me a raise, I said, look, I'm willing to be paid the same if you just let me telecommute, because we had what were called VPNs then, right? Like we didn't have the internet as we do now. I'm like, I can access the through the VPN to get to the FTP so that I can work remotely. Like this is how it was back in the 90s, people.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, we need you here in the office. And, but I needed the flexible schedule because I had 2 young kids and I was going to college full time. And so I ended up leaving that organization for one that was going to allow me to work remotely part-time. So it was their loss.
Yeah, there was a big change after the pandemic because there were a lot of companies who would not let people in sales roles work remotely for a long time for inside sales roles.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to talk. You had mentioned data for me as well. I know it's like every time we talk, it goes by so fast, doesn't it? So we can talk a little bit about the data, but you had mentioned too, like one of the mistakes that people make in the hiring process is that they use personality assessments. Talk a little bit more about that. Why is that not enough for a sales role?
Well, personality assessments are kind of fun. There's a lot that are like 4 quadrants and they're kind of neat. I'm very I love visuals, so I'm very attracted to things like that. But they actually don't determine who's better in sales and who's not as strong because they're not based on sales competencies. Mm-hmm. And so, as fun as they are, as helpful as they might be to see if someone will fit into a team, I think they're very much needed, and you can use them for that role to see whether someone's going to fit in a team well, but not as to whether they can sell or they will sell. And Carole, that the will to sell is more important than the skills can be developed. The actual skills about consultative selling value, we can teach those anytime. Yeah. But if you don't have the will to be successful or the will to be a successful manager, if you don't have the mindset, if you can't be accountable, or if you're a sales manager and you can't hold your team accountable, I mean, it's going to be it's not going to be successful. I was going to say a disaster, but it could just be a small mess, that does not go well.
Yeah. I've been working with a sales leader who, her words were, I want to have killers. I want people who wake up every morning and they're hungry and they're going to hit the ground running and they're going to bring in new business, right? And she was using a personality assessment, a behavioral assessment that talked about their tendencies. They will likely do this. They tend to do this. But what it didn't show was, are they willing to do whatever it takes ethically to reach their particular goals? Like you said, will they actually do it? Not, they might do it. They have a tendency to do it. That's great. But when you get into the heat of things, tendencies tend to fly out the window sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that will to sell, that commitment to doing whatever it takes ethically to make something happen, that's that killer instinct that she was looking for. But the assessment that she's using isn't giving her that information. And so she ends up with people who aren't as committed to doing whatever it takes, or they're only committed to the point where if certain conditions apply, then I'll do whatever it takes, which is not true commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I'm motivated, but I'm not really committed.
Yeah,
right?
We're all motivated. We all have the desire for success. And we wake up, we want to get things done. But when the hard work comes in and you have to face a tough choice about what you need to do, that's when you really see the test in the metal of that particular individual.
Yeah.
All right, let's close this out, because one of my biggest pet peeves is, all right, so let's say you've hired a top salesperson. This is where it typically all starts to fall apart, is when you start onboarding them. Now, my biggest pet peeve is when onboarding starts with, and Trish Bertuzzi and her book, The Sales Development Playbook, is what really, really opened my eyes to this, is that the majority of companies start off with their product and their pricing and their internal operations. And then they're like, why is it that our salespeople are getting into our sales calls and all they're doing is pitching products? Why aren't they talking about the buyer? Because you haven't trained them on the buyer. You've immersed them in the world of you, not in the world of your buyer. What's your biggest pet peeve about onboarding?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the fact that it's not focused on what is it that our buyers need, what kind of problems do our buyers have, who are our buyers, all those things that we should be talking about on day one, and not all the details. And that stuff can be done as needed, as as a week goes by, as a month goes by. But yeah, if they want people to dive in, which some do, like to be conversing with buyers right away, I mean, you need to prepare them. And the best way is to give them information about the day of the life of your buyers, and what their world is like, and what their problems are, and how you've helped others in the past, and really good stories about problems that you've solved.
Yeah. And now we have this beautiful technology for call recording with AI to be able to help us sort through all of it, so that you can pull out snippets of conversations of what buyers are sharing in these conversations, their challenges, their pain points, what they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked, their goals, the impact of that. This is all information that's at your fingertips. But I think sales leaders don't realize fully that what they teach is what their sellers are going to preach. And if you're starting with the buyer, that becomes the context then for all of your products and all of your services and the benefits thereof. And that's also easier for your salespeople to remember it, because they're not so overwhelmed by all of the technical aspects, and they can dig into their discovery with their buyers faster and quicker and more effectively by having the kind of training and onboarding that's focused on the buyer first. Hence the book.
That's right.
All right. Last thought, last closing thing that you want to leave people with in our last 2 minutes, Lori.
If you're that sales leader that's overseeing some managers and a team of people, hold people accountable. Don't go back on your word. Be good on your word. Set goals and parameters so that people have guide wires, and that they know that they need to coach, and that they need to be coached, and those things, so that people can get in the habit of these really good things that we know that salespeople need, but often will say, no, I'm fine, I don't need anything. We all need those.
Yeah. I will leave everyone with, if you've done onboarding well, it doesn't ever end. It should be continued into continuous coaching and training through your managers. And by the way, pipeline reviews and asking when the deal is going to close is not coaching. If you haven't dug into the behaviors and dug into why they're going to do those behaviors, all you're doing is just throwing information on them and creating pressure, which is a lot of times causing the very problems that you're trying to solve for.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, Lori's got some resources in her link tree that I want to share with everyone. So I'm going to share that now with you. Check that out. She's got all kinds of wonderful resources. I'm sure there's a link to your book in there as well. Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So check that out and make sure that if you haven't registered for Inbound yet, DM me. I will email you a code that you can get 15% off, and you can see Lori and I at Inbound with another group of sales leaders that you can collaborate with so that you can make 2024 your strongest year yet and 2025 be set up for success.
Yeah.
I also have some resources for everyone. That sales mistake calculator that I mentioned is in there, as well as how to grade your sales process and look at your teams in a way that is more predictable and data-based. All right, everybody. Lori, thank you so much again for joining me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks, Carole. It's my pleasure.
All right, everybody. See you at Inbound. Bye.